Okay.
All right. Hi, Joel. How are things in
Hi.
Boston?
It's really it's not bad. It's pretty crazy. I mean, with the pandemic and everything, Boston is just exiting its big wave of cases. So everybody's kind of being very extra cautious, being
Let,
tested.
let me introduce you to our class here. So this is Joel Lau, everybody. He is a junior at Boston University and majoring in journalism. And he grew up in Hawaii, attended which
Hawaii
school?
Baptist Academy.
Hawaii Baptist Academy. He was our civil beat intern in summer 2019, which is how we met. And he also, when he returned to Boston in the fall, did an 8-month long internship with the Boston Globe.
Hmm.
So very cool. And now you're back in school, yeah, for the semester. And um, I wanted to bring Joel on today because he wrote some amazing stories for Civil Beat when he was our intern last year, and or a couple that particularly made good use of data. So one that I want to start with is actually the story, Joel, that you did about how there are more Hawaii students leaving the state for college than in prior years. So tell us a little bit about how you came onto the story idea, first of all.
Yeah. So, one, I want to give a quick shout out. One of really good, really cool parts about interning for the beat was that they give us a lot of time to really brainstorm and think of our own stories and try to develop our own pitches. So that was kind of what I was doing. I was sitting down and I was between stories, so I didn't really have a specific idea yet. But I started thinking about my own experience as a Hawaii resident. I had actually applied for UH as part of my general college search. Actually was offered a scholarship at UH, but ended up not going through with the scholarship and instead heading to Boston University for college. And I was wondering, it got me thinking if there were other students, other people my age who also decided to do the same thing. So you could say that was kind of the seed of an idea. I didn't yet know if there was a story. It was just a really, really basic idea I had. So I started poking around online. I found that, well, one really good thing is that a lot of data, a lot of US federal education data is made public online for reporters and just the general public to use and poke around. So I started going through some of the US Department of Education databases, and this is the Federal Department of Education database, and started looking at some numbers and comparing especially numbers about Hawaii students. And she's pulling it up right now. Numbers about Hawaii students and the percentage and ratio and numbers of how many Hawaii students decided to leave the state versus stay in Hawaii for college, and found that, especially in recent years, that number had been increasing, which I pitched. I developed into a pitch. I pitched to my editors, mainly Suvan and Richard,
Well,
who,
mainly
yeah,
Richard, who was our
mainly.
former editor. Yeah.
Mhm. And he said it was interesting and asked me, gave me the go ahead to really start exploring this data more.
So
And
this is a chart, or mostly the data set you used, right, Joel?
yeah, one of several, but this is the big one.
Right.
Um, the raw numbers of
And
the.
it turns out
Mhm.
that I actually was poking around this myself, and they updated it for 2018, or well,
Yeah.
they updated it since I think you wrote the story.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, cool. And so you reached out to a few people for the story,
I did.
and were they able to point you to some even more further data sets
Yeah.
or more
So
data?
definitely. So my original story had originally been on the data from the U.S. Federal Department of Education,
Right.
which was pretty notable. It's pretty significant, I guess. If you want to, in that paragraph right there, it talks about how there's been an increase of a couple hundred students leaving the state since 2010, which I thought was pretty significant data. But then I talked to Roxy Shabazz, who is in administration, and I talked to her, I think, later in the article, who's in administration with UH, and she was talking about how the numbers, the difference between Hawaii students leaving the state and other US students leaving their state was even more significant when you specifically look at the students who took the SAT and took advanced placement tests. I think if you look at that graph right there, it showed that she told me that over 50% of Hawaii students who took the SAT, PSAT, or AP classes chose to attend an out-of-state institution, which I thought, the bigger the number, and I confirmed it as well myself, but the bigger the number, the more significant and newsworthy the story. So I think that really helped boost, I guess, the newsworthiness of the story that I was writing.
Interesting. So just over half of Hawaii students who chose to take the SAT, PSAT, or AP chose to attend an out-of-state institution, significantly higher than the national average of around 22% of students choosing to leave the state.
Which is a big difference that I thought. It was like, wow, I did not expect that. But during my interview with her, which turned out to be like over an hour long, I think, if I remember correctly.
How did you prepare for that interview, Joel? What did you do to prepare for an interview? Because we went over interviewing techniques a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. A big thing is just coming prepared with numbers and questions. You don't want to like be too strict with like the flow of the interview. I think a good thing about interviews is you want to let the source kind of introduce new things that you didn't think about, which is one of how I found that number. But you don't want to come unprepared. You do want to go with a set of basic things you want to find out, and basic references and numbers that you can bounce off and you can have a conversation with them. Because it really is more of a conversation. I feel like the best interviews are conversations.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And was there another sort of story that you used a lot of data for that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah.
This one?
So yeah, definitely that one. So an earlier story I had written, I think maybe a couple of weeks before I wrote the UH story, was this story about Fafsa applications. And this story was actually one that Suvan had forwarded to me to look into. She had found that database and thought that it might be cool to look into it and see if there was a story in it. So I did, and I feel like this one was even more numbers heavy than the last one, because this one dealt with FAFSA data and from every single one of Hawaii's public schools, which there are quite a few.
The thrust of the story is that percentage of seniors in Hawaii public high schools who apply for financial aid is going up because of a state effort to boost application, because of the state effort.
Yeah, definitely. So it was a relatively new program. It just been announced or started, I think, the year before or a couple years before. So I guess we were just looking at what effect it had, if it had an effect, and the story was that it does seem like it's paying off.
So this is familiar to you. This is go back
to
your report
definitely
from that article.
No,
just kidding. So how was it sorting through the data? What was it like navigating this data set?
Yeah. So a good thing was that their FAFSA data does come in a dashboard, which is something that they create to kind of break down the data. It makes it easier to kind of comprehend it. But I think it was also really useful that they made the data available in its raw form. I forget the specific term for it, but they made the data available in its raw form. So I downloaded that, inserted that into Excel, and it started playing with it.
Okay. So you didn't use this template. You used the raw data and played around with it yourself in Excel. Okay.
I downloaded the raw data and started trying to look for trends, trying to look for outliers, and that's how I got this story, which was kind of comparing which high schools saw bigger increases in
I know you kind
the
of go through
essential
some
student.
individual schools.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What
And then I worked with our data journalist at the time,
Harley?
Carly. I think she's working for Gannett now.
Yeah.
Um, but to develop some charts and tables that we could insert in the story to
I
kind
know
of
this will put
boost.
you on the spot just a little bit, but were there any other major takeaways that you recall from this story when you
Yeah.
were reporting it out?
I think a big one is that numbers can be intimidating. Uh, when you just get a big spreadsheet of numbers, sometimes you don't know what to do with it. It's like you have all these numbers, and it's so what? How am I supposed to find a story from it? But I think just continuing to look through them and poking around and playing with the data, looking for trends and outliers are the big ones. Trends and outliers. If you're looking for stories and data,
Yeah.
that's how I got my UH story, and that's how I got the Fafsa story. Was
Okay.
looking at trends and outliers.
Great. And then
Mhm.
turning to when you were sort of analyzing the data in Excel, how
Mhm.
did you learn to do that? Was that something you had taught yourself or
Yeah. So a good thing, I guess, about my high school was I did have some experience in Excel and using Excel. And then I also had just finished taking stats in college. Um,
oh, gotcha.
so not that I did use any really, really complicated things. The main things I did was like I organized, tried to organize I took like the big set of data and organized it according to the different, I guess, fields that they provided in terms of like, for example, for the FAFSA story, they had a different data available on like the percentage of people who applied, the percentage increase over the past year, and a lot of different fields and different factors that they included. So really, the big thing the main thing I was doing was just like really looking, reorganizing the data, um, and trying to look for outliers and trends when you organize by like different factors, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For example, like organizing by like which schools saw the biggest increase, which schools saw the most total applications, and
Yeah.
even making graphs out of those as well,
So
which is
have you
really
been able to apply any sort of database reporting or analysis in your with the Boston Globe during the subsequent internship?
yeah, definitely. I think one story that I just wrote, not necessarily during my internship. I'm actually taking a class right now with Boston University that
Uh-huh.
is working with with the Globe's local news division. So my most recent story that got published in the Globe was a story on Newton Public Schools, actually, which is a city right next to Boston in the greater Boston area. And was looking at their reopening data and specifically at the their vent HVAC systems and the effectiveness of their HVAC systems. And one uh, big thing that happened recently was that recent test showed that I think a third of the HVAC systems didn't meet minimum standards.
Wow.
So that yeah, it was actually pretty big story. It turned out to be, and I think it wasn't as numbers heavy per se, but that definitely that look to the data
What
kind of skill set
record did
was
you rely on?
important. Huh?
What records did you rely on to come to that conclusion that they were that percentage were not adequate of the HVAC system?
Yeah. So I want to make sure first I wasn't the one who found out that who like kind of announced that broke the news that this was that a third of the tests had come up short. It was an announcement from the public schools that they
I
trigger
see.
the story. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it did involve a lot of like looking to like numbers, and kind of looking through like complicated terms and looking at like data, and kind of that general data driven skill set.
Okay.
Not as much of a numbers heavy story, but it was still kind of touched on those same skills.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, that's great. That's great. I think that your stories and the examples here do illustrate that, with some dogged analysis and
Mhm.
willing to look for, like you said, those trends and outliers, one
Yeah.
can really come up with a great story that might not be
Hmm.
immediately evident, but it takes a little digging. And
Yeah.
numbers don't have to necessarily be intimidating, right?
Hmm. Definitely. And like, I'm not like every not every set of numbers will have a story, but you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at what you do find when you just play around with the numbers.
Totally, totally. And it never hurts to ask for more available
Hmm.
data, right? From like
Hmm.
official stuff that we might
Oh
not
yeah.
know exists
Hmm.
necessarily. And I love
Yeah.
the story that you provided about how you got onto the UH, more students leaving the state for college idea because you were inspired by your own personal experience. Um,
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
that I'm always emphasizing to the class, which is bring
Hmm.
your own self into story generation or your own
Hmm.
background. That's all super relevant.
Hmm.
So
Definitely.
great, great. Well, thank you for joining us all the way over from the East Coast. And it's probably getting colder there now. Um,
It is. It's so cold in my room. They have yet to turn on the heat, so
really,
I'm
I'm
going
just
up with a
like,
sweater.
meantime, I'm like, it's so hot in Hawaii. I wish it get colder soon. But okay, well, stay safe, Joel. Thank you for
Mhm.
joining us. Any last takeaways or anything else you want to say?
I mean, I'm still going through the whole journalism school experience myself. So I'm kind of in the same boat as a lot of people in the class. But I think one big thing is just that, this job that we do is so important, and especially during crazy times like these. And one thing that I found reconfirmed to me after every experience, every internship that I do, it's just um, sometimes it's unglamorous. Sometimes the process can be boring, and uh, you have to go through big sets of numbers, and it might seem intimidating, but in the end, it's really fulfilling. And I'm really excited to what the future will hold for me and for everybody as
Yeah,
well.
as we are too. Thank you, Joel. Okay.
Thank you.